Hello everyone. I wanted to add this video about eating disorders because I think it's a really important topic, and the book didn't cover it very well, and then there were no other videos about it, and we didn't want you to think that it's not important because obviously it's very important. So we're going to talk about anorexia, we're going to talk about bulimia and binge eating disorder, and then we're also going to talk about this orthorexia, which you may have heard about, and it's a newer form, really I think, of anorexia, where people are just obsessed with clean eating and eating healthy to a point where it's actually really unhealthy. So we're going to talk about that. I also posted an extra credit assignment about orthorexia for you so that you can really understand what it is if you're really interested in it. So anorexia is something that we're all pretty familiar with now. Anorexia really started to escalate in the 70s and the 80s. Prior to that, we saw anorexia, but not very often. And today it's still pretty common. I think that it's decreasing, but there still are definitely many cases of anorexia out there. So anorexia is just deliberately starving yourself and having really significant weight loss, being 15% at least below your ideal weight. And people that have anorexia have an intense fear of gaining weight or of being fat. And they often are very restrictive in their eating. They'll only eat certain things, they'll only eat a certain amount of food, and they're very afraid of gaining weight. They're also, actually, it actually hurts their stomach, I think, to eat, because if you haven't eaten for a very long period of time, your stomach doesn't handle food as well, and so you might feel like you have an upset stomach when you do actually try to eat. And anorexics are absolutely hungry. There have been myths that say that they're not hungry, but they're absolutely starving, but they're just ignoring those signs of being starving. Sometimes they also compulsively exercise. Oftentimes they feel like they can't eat unless they've exercised, or if they do eat something, then they have to work it off. They have to exercise it off. Oftentimes they're very sensitive to cold. Sometimes they'll wear real baggy clothing, lots of layers because they are cold. And there are a lot of health effects, of course, to anorexia, one of them being death, of course, because when you starve yourself to death, eventually you will die, your systems will shut down. People can have heart attacks and kidney failure, lots of system failures as well. But one of the signs of malnutrition is just losing that menstrual period as well. We're going to talk about anorexia in men as well, because anorexia does occur in men as well. And unfortunately, it's increasing in men. So anorexia has the highest mortality rate of all of the psychological disorders, which is kind of crazy to think about. Depression, suicide, bipolar, schizophrenia. Less people die from those disorders than they do from anorexia. So 20% of people that are diagnosed with anorexia will actually die from it. So really sad. And this picture here is of the same young woman. She's very thin here. She was, I think, a newscaster in Florida. And I think she broke off a relationship. She was going to get married and started, getting into the throes of anorexia. And this is a picture of her weeks before she died. She got down to such a low level that her body could no longer sustain life. Many people with eating disorders, whether it's overeating or undereating or anorexia, suffer from anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar, and obsessive compulsive definitely seems to be very related. So people with anorexia, they become obsessed with being thin. They also become obsessed with not eating, and the compulsion is to not eat and to be really restrictive about eating. They also might compulsively exercise as well. So there definitely seems to be an obsessive compulsive component to anorexia and most eating disorders too. So I think I already mentioned that cases of anorexia really escalated in the 1970s and 80s. And if you think about it, our body image ideals have really become more and more perfect in our society today. We also have a lot of social media, lots of perfect images of people like we're supposed to look like them, and that really contributes to anorexia. So 0.1% of men and 0.5% of women are diagnosed with anorexia. So 1 in 5 people are men. Mostly it's women, but absolutely there are men that suffer from anorexia. So anorexics have an exaggerated fear of being fat, and the main cause of anorexia is this body dysmorphia, which is a distorted body image. They look in the mirror and their skin and bones and they see themselves as overweight. Often anorexics are very perfectionistic. They're also very competitive. Sometimes there are some horrible internet sites where anorexic women are trying to compete with each other to be the thinnest, and it's very, very unhealthy. But they're also very driven. They have really high expectations of themselves. They start out with a normal diet, just wanting to, meet some perfect ideal, and it gets out of control. So we know that body image issues are really one of the primary causes of anorexia. And the scary thing is that younger and younger girls, and probably boys as well, are becoming more overly conscious of their weight. 42% of first and third grade girls want to be thinner. I don't remember ever thinking about that in first or third grade. 81% of 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat. 89% of women, this won't surprise most of us women, are unhappy with their body. I think it's 43% of men are unhappy with their body, which isn't good either. But most women are unhappy with their body shape. So we know that the media ideals of what we're supposed to look like are unrealistic, but we still try to achieve them. And sometimes for some people, that can lead to anorexia. So we know the average woman is 5'4" and 106 pounds. The average model is 5'10" and 107 pounds. Major, major difference. And being anorexic is not about being attractive to men. Most of the time it's about control and about perfectionism, and just trying really hard to be perfect and meet that perfect ideal. And honestly, most women that become really anorexic, they lose their menstrual period and also may lose that sexual drive as well. And so this is a picture of the new Barbie and the old Barbie. And the old Barbie is actually anatomically impossible. Her waistline is way too small. It's not even physically possible for us to have a waistline that small. And her neck is longer than a normal person's would be. And the new Barbie is a little better, but she's still pretty perfect as well. So, and then we look at the models that are being sent down the runway, and touted as this is our ideal of beauty in our society. And these poor young women are starving to death to try to meet this perfect ideal. And I don't know what you all think, but I don't think these women should have been sent down the runway. They don't look healthy, and they really actually need some intervention. This one, I really applaud the British advertising regulators that said this ad is not appropriate, that we don't want to present this emaciated young girl who looks ill as an ideal of beauty for our young girls to try to look up to. So this was a Gucci ad that they pulled because they said this girl is unhealthy. And so our ideals of beauty change over time, and I think they've gotten so restrictive these days, and so I think we're seeing a lot of stuff posted on social media, and we can all look pretty good in one little photo, but if we can make ourselves look happy, we can make look like we're having this great life, when really it's just a bunch of still pictures that may or may not really indicate that. But anyway, back in the Renaissance time, it was actually considered attractive to be a little bit overweight. It was considered a sign of wealth because you didn't have to do hard labor and you had enough food to eat. So it was definitely considered attractive to be a little chunky. Marilyn Monroe from the 1950s looks great there. And then these are 1970s. This is Farrah Fawcett, you guys probably don't remember, and Christy Brinkley from the 1970s. And they're very perfect, but they're also pretty natural looking. They don't have breast implants. Their photos are not retouched or anything like that. So Then we look at today's ideals. These photos are probably retouched here. This waistline here is probably photoshopped to make it look even smaller, and she probably looked pretty darn good to begin with. And over here, they may have increased her neckline. I'm not sure if these breasts are real, but it's this impossible ideal that we're all trying to achieve that is really causing a lot of body image issues for young women. I don't know if you guys know Ashley Graham, but she was on the cover of Sports Illustrated a few years ago, and she's a plus size model and she's gorgeous. And I'm hoping, and as a society, that we're going to celebrate people of all shapes and sizes, all colors, all races. It's not a one size fit all. There's a lot of people that are beautiful, and we don't all fit into that tiny model image, but that doesn't make us any less beautiful. So men actually suffer from eating disorders as well. 10% of eating disorders are men, and the numbers appear to be increasing. So 10% of anorexics are men, and surprisingly, 25% of bulimics are men, which really surprised me. I didn't even realize men were bulimic. But this is a young man that died at age 38. He was a model. He was handsome, muscular, and I think he had a relationship breakup, and he started starving himself and compulsively exercising and just fell into anorexia and got down below 90 pounds. This is him right before he died. And he had all sorts of treatment and help, but he just couldn't force himself to eat, which is really sad. This is the same man here, and oftentimes we don't always know that somebody's anorexic because they're wearing clothing to kind of cover it up. But men definitely suffer also from eating disorders, and for many of the same reasons as women do. Homosexual men have much more pressure actually to be thin as well. So men's dissatisfaction with their bodies is definitely increasing. So women have always been unhappy, but men used to be pretty happy. 15% of men 30 years ago were content with their body, or upset, unhappy with their body, dissatisfied with their body. Today it's all the way up to 43%. So it's definitely increasing. And I put these pictures on here. This is John Travolta from the 1970s when he was doing Saturday Night Fever and when he was really popular. And you look at him, he does not have big muscles. He doesn't probably have a six-pack under there. And yet he was like the heartthrob of the 70s. And this is Jim Palmer, who's a baseball player. It looks good. But today, this wouldn't be, this would not be in the magazine today or posted in social media. So this is David Beckham, and this is a model here that I thought looked pretty good, I guess. But the thing is that both of these men must work out a couple hours at least a day and watch everything that they eat in order to maintain this physique. And is that attainable for normal people? We have jobs, we've got school, how can we fit that all into our schedule? And should we? Is this really the healthiest way to be? I thought that this guy was really brave to share this. He's a catcher for the Seattle Mariners. I don't know if I think he was traded. I'm not really sure. And I can't even say his name correctly, Mike Marjama. But he actually came out and said that he suffers from eating disorders, that he suffers from bulimia, that he's restrictive in his eating, that he has body image issues. He was, I think, overweight as a kid, and always struggled with, wanting to make sure he's fitting in, make sure he's got the right body image. And, you think of somebody who's a professional athlete who's been really successful, you would never even imagine that they might have a body image issue. But he absolutely does and has sought treatment for it. So anorexia is really a torturous relationship with food, as is this orthorexia as well. So orthorexia is not an official DSM-5 diagnosis of a psychological disorder. But it probably will become one of them. It seems there's a lot of parallels to anorexia with orthorexia as well. So in orthorexia, and I don't know why they came up with this particular term, but it's where the person is really obsessed with what they call clean eating, and many of you know what that is. But this is something that has been touted on social media and maybe through different diets and things like that, talking about cleanses and just eating whole foods. And some of it is healthy and some of it is not healthy. And I think sometimes young people are having difficulty sorting out what's healthy, what's not healthy, and also maybe idolizing some people on Instagram or whatever social media that are posting these pictures of food and their perfect life, and like sort of touting you can have this perfect life too if you just eat this way. And really it's causing a lot of people to get very sick, and it's leading to health issues. So it was the sort of first kind of discovered in 1998, but it's not been around as long as anorexia, and so it's really this obsession with food and making sure that it's really about eating perfectly, only eating good foods, and then they sort of separate out good foods and bad foods, and feel ashamed if they don't eat the right foods. It's really being very obsessed and possessed with just being perfect and eating things perfectly, and it really consumes their whole life, just like somebody that's anorexic. People that are anorexic will restrict their eating, and their whole focus in life is not eating and getting around that, and then exercising if they do eat, weighing themselves. Their whole life is centered around their weight. And in orthorexia, their whole life is centered around what they eat or don't eat. And it's really becoming a big problem. And how can healthy eating be bad? But there are some definite problems that these social media people are not nutritionists. They don't have a dietitian that's giving them information, so they're not really giving good information about how to eat healthy. So they may be eating healthy foods, but you really need a balanced diet. You have to have protein, you have to have other things. And so there are many like vegan websites and things like that. And you have to be really careful that you're getting a website that actually has accurate information, because you can get really sick if you don't eat the right foods. Not that you can't be a vegetarian or a vegan and be healthy, because you can, but it takes, you have to actually really plan out what you're going to eat and what you're not going to eat, and make sure you have enough of each of the food groups in there. So that's becoming a real problem. I only mention underweight here because I always have a few students in class that suffer from being underweight. There are people that have difficulty gaining weight, and it could be men and it can be women, and it seems to be something that's genetic. They're just born that way, and there may be something different about their metabolism or their digestive system. Usually, the people that are underweight, the research that has been done, they tend to feel full much more quickly than somebody that's overweight or just even at a regular weight. So they stop eating, they don't overeat like some other people do. But it's really difficult sometimes for them to gain weight, and oftentimes they don't get a lot of sympathy and then sometimes people will accuse them of being anorexic. And one of the things about this orthorexia here is that you really can't see it in a person, except for you'll notice if you have a friend that's just really obsessed with food, has a really hard time making decisions about what to eat, what not to eat, and just you can see the anxiety about eating around them. They might look like a perfectly healthy person, perfectly normal weight, and they may exercise on a normal basis, and yet their relationship with food is really unhealthy. But somebody that's underweight, it's not, they don't, that's just who they are naturally. And, they don't get a lot of sympathy, but they should not get any accusations either. So bulimia is the last eating disorder that I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about binge eating disorder as well. So bulimia is where people eat an excessive amount of food, usually, and then they feel ashamed of doing it afterwards, and they don't want to keep all those calories. So a lot of times they'll force themselves to throw up, or they might take laxatives to get rid of the calories. And one of the main problems of bulimia is tooth erosion. So this young woman here is bulimic, and what happens is that acid that digests that food in your stomach, now when you throw it up, and especially on a regular basis, that acid is now eating away at your teeth. So it really is it's not good, and it can cause kidney damage, even death sometimes is not rare, but it's definitely not good for you. It was first diagnosed in 1979, and definitely more women than men, and a smaller percentage of the population have bulimia as well. So the only difference between binge eating disorder and bulimia is that people with binge eating disorder, they don't purge the food, so they don't get rid of the calories. They just eat a huge quantity of calories in a short amount of time, usually a couple of hours. And so this young girl here who's having a dozen donuts or so and a burger with fries and it looks like a hot dog with fries and some other dessert here, all within a couple of hours. So a huge amount of food. So it's still more prevalent in women than in men. So 3% of women, about 1% of men. Um, 1/3 of binge eaters are obese, which is interesting because you think, what about the other 2/3? They're not obese. They just may go out on a binge because they're upset about something or something bad happened. And a lot of these binge eaters will go to multiple fast food restaurants. So they might go to Taco Bell and order a bunch of food and eat it in the parking lot, and then drive to another fast food place and eat a bunch more other foods. So binge eating is just when you consume a huge amount of food in a brief amount of time. And when the person is doing this, they really feel out of control, like they can't control their eating. They really feel compelled to um, go and go to that restaurant or wherever it is they want to go and get that food. And we all know that the food tastes really good at first and it's great, but how long does that feeling really last? Not very long. And that's probably part of the deal with binge eaters as well, is they get that relief from binging on all that food, and then that rush of feelings comes back again. And it's kind of an escape. We talk about foods being comforting, comfort foods. Thanksgiving's coming up here, and we think about food as a comfort sometimes, and it can be comforting, and sometimes it's an escape for some people, and sometimes it morphs into something much worse with the binge eating disorder, and the person's always embarrassed and ashamed and often really secretive. They hide their overeating. So it's a problem that we're seeing a lot more of, and it's interesting to think of here in our modern society. We have more food than most of us have more food than we need to eat, and we have a lot of unhealthy choices, but we have a lot of really good healthy choices as well. But finding that balance and that normal relationship with food seems to be really challenging for a lot of people, and I think we all struggle with that idea. Should I eat this? Should I not eat this? Should I exercise? Should I not? We all know what the right things are to do, but we're tempted by so many other things in our environment, and we have to really think about that, and make good choices, which isn't always easy to do, but I think if mostly we make good choices, we'll do well. So thank you for listening.